So hello, welcome everybody. Excited to have you here at our webinar. It's obviously in technology land. It's a very exciting time these days with AI, and we think that decisions are probably the place where AI is going to have the most impact on our lives and on our companies. So we're going to talk about that today. I'm Erik Larson. I'll be Master of Ceremonies, mostly in the background, where we really want to take as many questions as we can from you throughout the webinar. I'm going to say that again at least once. This is really us trying to communicate to you what we've been learning and working with our clients and developing solutions in this area. So very excited to have questions from you. And you can just go to the chat or go to the Q&A pod and just ask a question there, and I'll respond. I'll weave it into the discussion as needed. Please don't hold back. It's a quick introduction to our company. Cloverpop is a decision intelligence platform. I've personally been doing this for over a decade, decision intelligence as a software solution, and AI has changed everything for us, just like everybody else. We focus primarily on consumer CPG companies, consumer health, pharmaceutical companies, manufacturing. We have many very impressive and large global clients, and we've been thought leaders for a long time. Decisions obviously has been an interesting part of management theory for a long time, but decisions plus the application of technology is relatively new. And the way I like to say it is that decisions need to be treated like we treat CRM systems or ERP systems or financial systems, where you can actually go and look up decisions, you can learn from decisions, and especially now with AI, you can teach AI about decisions. So very exciting time. Just a quick introduction to me or of me and our speaker today. So I've been building enterprise software products for a long time, and the Cloverpop focus of creating a system of record for decisions, I think, is a transformational idea that many other companies have now joined the bandwagon. And excited to show you guys what we're doing and how it can work within your enterprise. Lanny is my co-founder, chief commercial officer of Cloverpop. He's been working as a management consultant for a while. We tried to work to get his slides down, so I think we did a pretty good job of that, but he does have a management consultant love of PowerPoint that I personally don't share, but that's fine. He also has been working very closely with large clients, many of whom are actually on this call today. I do want to reiterate the interesting questions. I saw a couple come in as I was talking. I'll go jump over there and start to work on that. We do have a wide range of experience or knowledge levels about different aspects of technology and business. We're not doing a technical deep dive in this presentation. Lanny's going to give a demo of the product and we'll talk about how it's implemented. If you have deeper technical questions, I'll work to answer them, and we certainly would be happy to talk with you separately. So Lanny, I'll hand it over to you.
Yeah. Hey, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us. It's great to see so many friends and acquaintances here on the call. So really appreciate you spending the morning with us today. As Erik mentioned, my background is in management consulting first. So I do love my slides. So apologies if you see some consultancy slides, but hopefully we'll keep them relatively light for everybody. But beyond management consultants, I also spent about 15 years in the data analytics space, right? And when talking about operations strategy, growth strategy, and all these different elements, the challenge with really driving to activation from a DNA standpoint has always been an interesting challenge. And that's really what we're going to be talking about today. How do you actually start connecting the dots across the enterprise, both human related and information related, to really drive better recommendations, better decisions? So that's going to be the big theme for today's conversation. So from an agenda standpoint today, we're going to talk about a couple different topics, right? I want to start with, the big topic that we see every single day when we, tune into CNBC or open up the Wall Street Journal, which is really the AI value question, right? And that's a big, big question out there. A lot of volatility in the last couple of days due to that big question. So let's start there, and we want to provide a little bit of an angle or perspective on that. I want to then connect that to our favorite topic, the one that we're so passionate about, Cloverpop, which is the decisions. We'll then introduce decision intelligence. We'll talk about what it is. We'll do a demo, and then we want to open up for Q&A, right? And so to Eric's point, at any time during the webinar today, please feel free to drop them in the chat. If the question is related to where we are in the flow, we'll address those then. Any questions that we do not address, we will then talk about in that Q&A section. And then, as Erik had mentioned, we're more than happy to connect, follow up afterwards to get much more into the technical aspects of things as well. So again, thank you so much for joining us, and hope you find this information useful. So let's start with the AI value dilemma, right? And as I mentioned, a lot of conversation around the quote unquote AI bubble, right? And let's maybe break it down a little bit, and I want to provide a bit of a perspective on that. So if we look at, the last year, about $500 billion has been invested in building out the capacity or the supply for AI across data centers, training the actual models, investment in the overall AI ecosystem. This is going to balloon in the next year. We just saw Google, up their CapEx spend almost more than doubling it to about $180 billion this year. That investment is not for nothing. The expectations of what that investment can provide in terms of value generated to the overall global economy has been marked at about $20 trillion by 2030, based on McKinsey research. That is a massive number. Just to put that in a little bit of perspective, that would mean that we're adding an entirely new G7 nation to the global economy, increasing the global GDP by about 7%. Now, where's that value going to come from? Broad strokes here. About 75% of that is going to come from the enterprise, driving productivity, driving efficiency, accelerating growth, right? So that's about $15 trillion. So the hyperscalers, the players within the AI ecosystem are building out that supply, and it's being built very, very quickly. The real question on can we get to that $20 trillion fundamentally lies in the question, can the enterprise figure out how to realize that value? Can we integrate AI capabilities within our processes, within our functions, within our growth models to actually realize that return? And that's the big fundamental question that everybody's facing right now. So obviously the expectations are massive, right? From an enterprise standpoint, the promises are automation of about 30% of the work hours. I talked about the 7% figure just now, improving the productivity of highly skilled workers by about 40%, right? Those are massive, massive, claims that are still to be proven if we could achieve those. And they're all coming with this overall promise of the autonomous enterprise, right? Imagine a CEO in a boardroom with his Mac Mini connected to Maltbot running the Fortune 500 organization, right? That's kind of the Star Trekky type vision out there. Now, most likely that is not going to come close to happening. It's going to be realized in a very different way. But fundamentally, this is what the advisory firms, the analyst firms, that's the kind of potential that they are presenting to their clients, right? But regardless of how much of the enterprise we could actually automate, I think we could all agree that generative AI, is going to have a fundamentally transformative impact on the work, right? As AI automates the actual tasks, unlocks access to more information, more intelligence across the enterprise and outside of the enterprise, what that's going to allow your team members to do is really shift their focus from lower value added work, right? Sitting in lots of meetings, trying to collect a lot of different information, synthesize that information. It's going to allow them to focus on much more strategically impactful work, more innovative work, really focusing on execution and value capture for the business, right? The fundamental problem is if we look at I'll describe, 2021 to now as, the first wave of AI, deployments. And those have been, really welcomed with mixed results in that first wave, right? So just 1/4 of enterprises are reporting seeing significant value creation from their pilots. The actual share of companies pausing a lot of those AI initiatives has more than doubled as of last year. And in fact, the promise of all this automation and those different elements the people using AI right now are actually facing more burnout than the ones that are not, right? Now, all these, elements are okay. It was the first technology wave for AI, a lot of experimentation, a lot of piloting, a lot of learning, a lot of mistakes. That's totally normal. That is to be expected, right? But if we look at how the AI pilots have been deployed within the enterprises so far, right? A lot of different disparate AI use cases from, virtual assistants to BI enhancements to some automated HR co-pilots to trying to generate marketing content, right? What this has resulted in is very disparate deployments, a lot of, poor change management, increased technical debt, a lot of AI work slop. And so, of course, a lot of us have seen this statistic before from MIT last year, right? 95% of AI pilots have stalled before they've scaled, right? And there's a lot of different factors for that. A lot of hype over value, right? Great demos, but actually in production didn't really work. We have not adequately actually upskilled and trained individuals on how to use these new technologies. We've not integrated them adequately with ways of working, and a lot of different challenges, a lot of different bottlenecks and headwinds that have led to that type of a number, right? And so what we've been seeing over the last 6 months or so across the enterprise that we work with is executives are fundamentally shifting their posture on AI, saying, look, playtime is over. It's time to get practical on the applications. And oftentimes, especially when we're talking to folks within IT or more data analytics type backgrounds, they quite often first revert back to blaming the data and the model. So quite often we'll hear things like AI didn't fail, our data did. Bad data kills good AI every time. The model worked, but the plumbing didn't. These are all very, very fair criticisms and true to some extent, right? But we've seen the story before. Every single technology phase or revolution has had the similar fundamental challenges, right? Data, infrastructure, et cetera. It's always a moving target, right? In the, age of big data, that was an exciting one. We could go get information from, the entire enterprise. What happened, right? We had these massive data lakes that ended up turning into data swamps. To solve for that, we've had to create, thousands of dashboards to try to access the information. Still, nothing was talking to each other. We went to cloud SaaS, and then all of a sudden now we've got these amazing UX and tools to actually go conduct the work. But now we have a very disparate, tool set. And so it is not a new concept to say, okay, AI is going to have the same types of challenges. But the technology, the data, the pipelines are not the only challenges we have to think about. Quite often, the perception is to say, okay, if we want to drive better business results, let's make sure that we have the good data intact, we develop better models, and then hopefully we'll have better business results, right? This is too often the position I see, especially from the data analytics and IT type groups, right? What we're fundamentally missing is the most important piece, which is if we want to improve the data to build better models, that is in an effort to make better decisions in the hopes of driving better business results. The decision layer is the most important piece in this entire value chain. And decisions are unique. They're not only data-driven, but they're human-driven. We spend a lot of time reverse engineering decisions at Cloverpop, and we try to understand what is actually driving those decisions. And when we do these exercises, what we typically see is the actual decisions in the room, right? The 70% of the inputs that actually drive a decision to be made are not included in data models. They are mostly driven by the human element, the debates, the conversations, the cognitive and human biases that happen, right? Behavioral economics is fully based on this, right? So 70% of those inputs are not included in our actual models today. In fact, when we surveyed about 300 executives from 50 different companies, what we found is in the actual decision-making room, 5 out of 8 of those decision makers did not use the insights that were presented to them. And 78% of the time, the insights that were delivered did not actually change the stakeholders' mind in how they were making those decisions. So fundamentally, we have to find a way to start bringing the other elements into the equation. So before we get into that, let's maybe just dissect what a decision is. So, we're all working off the same, nomenclature and definition here, right? So if we want to achieve a business goal, let's say it's increasing revenue, there's a set of decisions that we could make, right? In this case, one of the decisions we'd make to achieve that goal is how do we optimize media spend and ROI, right? To make that decision, we have to answer a set of questions. Where is media currently underperforming? Which channels, audiences, and regions deliver the best return? What are the trade-offs that have to exist? What's the forecasted impact? All these different drivers that we need to answer in order to make this decision. Within most organizations, that the answer to those questions lies across different groups. It lies cross-functionally across various teams. So those individuals will be accessing their own data, their own tool. They'll be interpreting in that in their own ways. And all of that information starts getting molded and synthesized via lots of different emails, conversations, formally, informally, until some type of recommendation and decision is made. And then that decision then drives that action, right? So let's put, this in the back of our minds for a second. And going back to the AI, discussion that we're having. If we look at the early deployments, the kind of the phase one, as I'd call it, we're entering phase two in my mind right now. Three fundamental failure points that we're seeing. Number one, hype over value, right? So lots and lots of great demos, a lot of, tools with great promise, a lot of testing that was exciting, right? But they were not directly tied to business outcomes, right? It was experimentation. So hype over value is number one. Number two is models without mindset shift. So we're deploying lots and lots of new AI models, tools to the enterprise. But have we adequately actually stepped back and said, have we adjusted the ways of working? Have we adjusted the skill sets of the organization? The answer is no, not satisfactorily so far. And number three, information without insight. Anybody that's been working with lots of, generative AI tools know that it's great at creating lots and lots of content information. But is it tied to execution? Is it tied to the true insights that will lead to some type of action to be taken? So if I take those three elements together, right, I could say AI creates real value when number one, it's anchored to business goals. Number two, designed for how people work. And three, built to turn information into action. And so going back to that, decision landscape, it's the perfect place then to apply the best practices of AI to drive the true value creation, right? So what's in a decision? It's tied directly to the business goals. It's aligned to how people work. And fundamentally, it's built to turn information into some type of an action, right? And so from our perspective, what we need to do is align AI deployments and strategies around the foundational building block of the business, which is the decisions. Why do I say decisions are the foundational building block of business? Number one, it is the connecting thread between the data analytics we have at our disposal, the human expertise and experience, and number three, the business context and the business process. Number two, decision quality is the most predictive element of financial performance for an organization. Bain did a great study a couple years ago, and they had found that there was a 95% correlation between the decision-making quality of the organization, that is, how well do they actually frame up the problems, bring the right data and stakeholders together, and take the time to learn from those decisions. On that spectrum, the quality of decision-making within an enterprise had been 95% correlated with the financial performance of that organization. And finally, the third point, decision-making is the most ubiquitous activity of the enterprise. Everything from strategic decisions to tactical decisions. The average Fortune 500 makes about 10 million of them per year. So let's get to what is the missing link, right? Decisions. So if we think about the decision, if we think about a AI enterprise stack, or, we could also correlate this to just any, data analytics stack, right? You have a foundational layer. You've got your data storage, you've got your ingestion, you've got transformation. Then we have to synthesize, we've got to model these, all that data to get to some type of insight. We have to consume it in some type of way, right? Chatbots, BI visualization, et cetera, et cetera. Decision intelligence serves as that decision layer, right? And what is the unique piece of that decision layer? It's the ability to integrate the human element into the actual equation, right? So how do we actually do this, right? So Number one is we want to treat decisions as the activation point where enterprise value is fundamentally created, right? Decisions is more than just the data that goes into them. It requires the people, the process, and the technology all coming together to drive a decision, to drive action, and to drive value, right? And so that is exactly what decision intelligence is all about. Decision intelligence is how do we bring human intelligence, the expertise and the experience of our workforces, as well as the machine, the data science, the IT, the automation elements. How do we bring those together across an end-to-end decision-making cycle, right? From modeling the decision to orchestrating all the different components of the decision, the people, the data, the information, making the decision, executing it, monitoring its performance, and then learning from those decisions all in a closed loop cycle, right? So that is fundamentally what decision intelligence is, right? In the most basic way, the question is, how do I bring together structured and unstructured data plus human expertise and experience, framing it around a decision framework or a decision model, right? This is going to serve as a semantic layer within an AI context and facilitate that in an end-to-end process via decision intelligence platforms, right? So what are the fundamental components of a decision intelligence platform, right? So number one task is we have to figure out a way to bring together both structured enterprise data, unstructured data, think about this as your PowerPoint, your PDF type files, as well as the human expertise, right? So the way we bring these in fundamentally is we start with the decision playbooks, right? So think about these as the decision graphs that map the decision to the key questions that need to be addressed, including the people, the data source, and the types of analytics, right? So that is a decision framework, a decision playbook. Number two is an orchestration suite, right? So how do we asynchronously coordinate across geographically dispersed teams, cross-functionally dispersed teams to get that information? How do we connect the dots across multiple different data sources to connect them, right? And then how do we actually automate a lot of that difficult work via the decision agents? So those three elements come together to support making that decision. Once that decision is made, we could, of course, execute it directly, or we could route it for senior level approval. But in every case, we are treating those decisions as unique objects that we can then treat as data and continuously learn and optimize from. That is a big, big element of decision intelligence, that continuous improvement. One of the key elements to thinking, so when we start thinking about decision intelligence, we could think about it as a discipline, a way of thinking, and we could think about it as a technology, right? The actual decision intelligence platform. In both cases, we have to start with a fundamental point, which is decision back, right? In the old world, oftentimes we would start with, okay, what kind of data do we have? How do we start, synthesizing this information, create some insights? Hopefully, based on those insights, we'll create some type of a recommendation, and hopefully that recommendation, the decision makers will take that, execute against that, right? Decision back thinking is fundamentally flips it on its head. The question now is, how do we start with the business objectives that we want to achieve? Identify what are the key decisions that are required to achieve that objective. Then, who are the individuals? What are the insights? What is the data that's required to actually get to that point? We have to start decision back. To bring this to life a little bit.
Actually, Lanny, before you go there, I do want to. There's been a couple of questions. James Sun's been asking some really great questions. Some of them a little more technical, maybe than I want to get into here, but you can read it in the chat. This slide here, though, gets right to a point that he was asking about, which is that the magic of bringing AI to this. AI can't do anything without context, right? Without knowing what's going on. And when it comes to decision making, right now, most companies live in the pyramid on the left. They're coming up from data and saying, oh, what can AI do with data? And the problem with that is that that's not a very well-defined question. The starting with a decision and then thinking, how can AI help with this decision? Obviously, data is going to be part of that, but there's many other things that have to go into it. That's what we do as a company, and we see as a major opportunity. Now, once these decisions are documented, and this is in the chat, then we can apply machine learning to them. We can apply optimization to them. We can eventually train learning models with actual decision data as opposed to what they're trained on now, which is just general human knowledge. Lots that can be done. But right now, the big lift is this shift in thinking from how do we get the data to do stuff to what are the decisions that we're trying to make and how can we make those better, more efficiently, and so forth.
That's exactly right. Exactly right. And so one of the key starting points we'll talk about this is really creating those knowledge graphs, those decision graphs, so that we have that fundamental layer. That is the start. And what's interesting, we did a similar discussion yesterday with a roundtable group, and one of the questions was, hey, does this actually drive efficiency from requirements around data purchasing and those different elements, right? In practice, when we've seen this actually played out, most teams are able to cut about 30% of the data assets that they require to make these decisions because they have a clear path to say what specific data do we need for what specific purpose. And if it does not serve that purpose, then we could actually cut it, right? So it's a great efficiency play even in that way itself. Yeah. So fundamentally, this is the type of decision back graph that we're talking about, right? And we digitize these things within decision intelligence platforms to create these playbooks. And we'll show this in a live demo here in a second. So how is this actually built, end to end, right? The first piece is that decision builder, right? And so this goes to the point that we were just discussing. So the first thing we need to do is actually model that decision. A lot of different ways to do that. Within Cloverpop, our platform allows us to actually reverse engineer a lot of the documentation to get to those decisions. We also have a zero code way of actually building this, starting with the business logic and then connects it to the different ways. I'll show that to you live. The next question is what type or what is the extent that we want AI to support in the decision-making process? Not all decisions are created equal, right? Let me give a couple extreme examples. Should we acquire company X fundamentally should not be automated as a decision yet, right? It requires lots and lots of stakeholders. It's very subjective in nature, right? And it's a highly, highly consequential decision that we still need significant human oversight. That does not mean that AI cannot play a role within that decision, right? So we call that level one, human-led AI assisted, right? So we have a complex process. Probably 80% of that is still a human, 90% of it human-led versus truly objective data-led decisions, right? So it will help facilitate that process, orchestrate that process. And there we'll see significant compression in the time to decision based on the process efficiency gains. Number two is that AI augmented decisions, right? So think about these as material commercial decisions that might happen a little bit less frequently, but maybe on some type of a cadence. Think about this as a innovation type decision. Should we launch this new product? So if we have the framework, right? So in innovation, as an example, we think about stage gates, right? So which concept do we want to pursue? How should we launch this? What are the parameters for launch, et cetera, right? Still a lot of people, but a lot of those questions can be quantified, can be objective, and we could then actually augment a lot of those drivers and answer them automatically, right? So we'll have layers of analytics on it. It will run the analytics, provide you answers in certain drivers. In other places, there's still room for subjective input from human expertise and experience. It facilitates all of that, provides us with a recommendation. That's actually the type of demo I'm going to show you. And then finally, AI automated decisions, right? So high velocity decisions, there's a very concrete pattern of decision making we want to follow, concrete structure, and pretty stable data sources, right? So then we could actually build out the neural network and the layer on top of it, connect it to the data sources, and then automate the recommendations. What the human is able to then do is essentially accept, reject those different elements. In all of these cases, what we're fundamentally doing is treating those decisions as digital objects. So once a decision is made, it is stored in a system of record that can then be optimized, right? So now we start learning and optimizing in terms of were the right drivers considered? If not, what else should we add? How do we adjust these decisions in the future to make better ones, right? So this is truly starting to get us to real institutional knowledge, enterprise knowledge, and continuous improvement within this space. Okay. Now, I want to just quickly show this is a bit of a flip on, the previous page, essentially the same three steps, right? But what does it actually look like in practice, right? So first, we structure the overall decision. Number two is we're able to collaborate within that decision environment, right? So people can provide inputs. People are called to provide, specific expertise and specific drivers, review specific drivers. At the same time, any of the AI automations that have been deployed are now running. They're answering questions as they possibly can. The decisions are made, and then we're learning from those decisions, right? Now, I don't want to get into every single, step here specifically. We will be sharing this document with everybody that's attended, so, thank you, a little gift from us. So let's actually get into a live demo and, actually see decision intelligence in practice. And just give me a second and I will pull up the demo environment. And then Eric, as I am pulling this up, any questions that we want to get answered in the meantime?
I think cover the main ones. One thing maybe I'll add, and it was from the chat, is that what we are trying to build here, and what we're working with our clients to support is a set of decision data that doesn't really exist today, right? There's just there's no place to go to answer a question like, hey, what are the last 50 decisions that Lanny made? But in our company, actually, you could. But in most companies, in like basically all companies, you can't do that. Or what decisions were made that contributed to this change in our market share? That's just not really an answerable question. We don't even think of that as some place that you can go to a system and look it up. And what that means is that there's an enormous opportunity to improve the most important business activity. And AI makes this possible in two huge ways. One is it streamlines the decision-making process itself. So it makes the experience of making a decision better for people who are making decisions. And Lanny's going to show that here. And the second is that it then creates decisions as data objects that can be used to uh, create learning loops to create AI powered knowledge. So AI can help us to optimize our decision making and get closer and closer to automating more decisions, as Lanny talked about. So it's really a double whammy. It's that how do you actually get decisions into systems where people can use that or make decisions more quickly? That's a really critical question. It's not addressed by AI by itself. It takes actually a system like what we're building to do that. So Lanny, I'll hand it over to you for the demo.
Great. So let's go through the demo here, right? So keep in mind the flow that I had just described. Frame or structure, collaborate, and then decide and learn, right? So that's the overall flow that you're going to see here. So we're going to start from the home screen and very simply see any of the decisions that you need to participate in, as well as any of the decisions that you are a part of, and you can see sort of where it is in the overall process. Now let me take the persona of Edna Perez, okay? And so she wants to make a decision specifically on positioning for a specific brand, okay? So she's going to go to create the decisions. And here we have a long list of different decision playbooks, decision frameworks that have already been developed. Okay. And so let's click here. Do we need to adjust on positioning for product X, right? So this is a reusable decision template decision framework. So we'll go ahead, we'll click on preview decision, and we could see the overall logic and framework that we want to use, right? So do we need to adjust our position for product X? That's going to be dependent on, is the brand vibrant? Are consumers emotionally connected? Is the brand distinct from competitors? And then sub questions underneath. We could also identify and map, okay, who in the organization needs to have oversight around those specific questions. So if we're okay with this overall decision playbook, what we'll do is go ahead and create a decision. Now, in this case, I want to do it specifically for this brand called Goodline. Okay, so we'll go ahead and make that adjustment. And now we're in the overall, decision-making panel, right? So this is where, the action's happening. So what we have here is the data sources that had been, pre-connected that would be relevant for us to make this positioning decision. we have invited different individuals within the enterprise to participate in this decision, right? And they have been notified via Slack teams with links and what they need to do brought into the platform. And we have the decision tree, right? Now, the first thing we could do here is say, okay, this is a good framework, but is it missing any questions? And so what we could quickly do here is say, all right, let me get some additional driver suggestions to see, have I missed any of the questions in my overall framework? Is the framework comprehensive? Is it holistic? What is missing from the considerations I should make, right? So we have a list of those different elements. And if we want, we could add those in, assign owners to those, et cetera, et cetera. But let's say we're okay with this overall framework that we have here, right? So the first thing is I need to start answering these questions somehow, right? We've got a bunch of data connected. We've got some automations happening. So how does this all work, right? So within the brand funnel, as an example, I could see here one of the automations, we call them D-site, as our agents that are able to pull data, interpret the data in the context of the question, and answer that question, right? So that's already been connected to the system, right? So we could click here and we could see, all right, we already have the answer to this question readily available for us. We also have all of the data that would be useful for us in answering this question, right? We could also double click on these and actually go to the specific data source itself. So this is actually what I want to, the answer has already been provided. I'm going to go ahead and just add that in. I'm very confident in this information. And we're going to go ahead and add that piece to the driver. Now, human in the loop is a big piece here, right? So of course you saw that I could edit any of that content, but additionally, we could still have debates within the teams, right? So here, Kendra, has a comment on that. She wants somebody to double check that comment, right? But I don't want to have to go through all of these different, drivers and have to answer them automatically or manually, right? So how can we actually automate that process? So we've got a known decision framework. We'll call that the semantic layer. And then we've got the data sources that need to be used to answer those various questions. So what Cloverpop's decision AI assistants will now do is say, okay, let's complete the tree wherever possible. So it's preparing the data source, it's reviewing them, it's completing those drivers, completing those key questions, right? And so what you can see here is now every single one of these questions has been answered. The next thing I want to do is, okay, what's the actual recommendation to the decision I need to make? So we'll go ahead, we'll get the recommendation. And just like that, yes, we do need to adjust the brand positioning. Here's how we should be adjusting that piece, right? We'll go ahead, we'll save that. And now we need to make the actual decision. So, oops, let me just rerun that AI assistant. Here, we've got the answer. Let's go ahead and select the choice, provide the rationale, the next steps, the expected results, the opportunity value, and all those different elements. We'll go ahead, we'll hit done. And now we've made a recommendation or a decision, right? And that's actually an important distinction depending on the organization or the function that you're in, right? So if we make a recommendation, we could route this recommendation to the decision owners, request approval. They will get a summary of the recommendation. They could approve it, turning it into a decision. We could also create an action. So if we need to update a portfolio management tool, if we need to update some type of ERP system, that could all be automated within the system as well, right? But what we have here is now a record of that decision. So we have what was the decision, the rationale, other considered choices, next steps, what's the value, and a full history, a chain of ownership really across that entire decision. What were the key drivers that we looked at? What were the key questions asked? Who provided those inputs, whether it was data sources or not, right? Now, once these decisions are made, they are stored in a system of record, right? So we call this the decision bank, right? So this is all the decisions that had been made within the organization. And of course, this is all compartmentalized, so it's not like everybody at, a certain organization could see everything, right? There's permissions, rules, and permissions already built in. But I want to actually learn from these decisions, right? So how do I actually do that? Each one of those decision frameworks is tracking all the decisions that have been made leveraging that framework. And so when we click on this, now we could see really the who, what, when, where, and how of how that decision has been made in the past, right? When is that decision being made? What's the cyclicality of it? How many individuals are typically involved in making that decision? Who has been involved? Average time to decision. This is an important one. Typically, when you deploy Cloverpop, depending on if it's deployed kind of that level one AI assisted human driven, it's about a 4x acceleration time to decision. The fully automated one is about 10x, so significant cycle time compression there. But most importantly, what we're doing is we're looking at the actual drivers within the decision and understanding, okay, how often are those drivers actually completed within the decisions as we're making them? And how impactful or how predictive are they of success when we have that information when we don't, right? And so what that allows us now to do is over time begin to actually optimize those decision templates, those decision frameworks. So here's an original decision template based on all that information, all that data. Now we could see, okay, how do we actually optimize those frameworks? Really surfacing the best practices of how the organization is making those decisions and bringing it to really anybody that is within the organization that has to make the decision for the first time, right? What this fundamentally does is really ramps up onboarding speed for new team members, whether they're rotating into a role or coming from a different enterprise, right? Now all of a sudden we have the full templates. We understand exactly how these decisions are made, who needs to be involved, what's the data, and then what's the process for making those decisions. So what I just
And Lanny, maybe one quick point I want to make about this that's not directly visible in the demo, but I know you'll talk about a little bit in the case studies in a minute, is that once decisions are sort of brought out of the murk that they exist in right now and codified in this way, not only can we optimize the decision, but we can also improve the decision making process. We can begin to automate more of the decision making. So the number of people who actually come into, say, the Cloverpop platform to work on a decision goes down. The number of people who are working on the decision managed by Cloverpop goes up because they're able to work in other interfaces. Like as agents get deployed into Microsoft applications or other enterprise applications, they are then feeding in that information into this decision making and also automating the workflows that those people are doing. So this interface is just really a way of seeing what's possible, seeing how we're creating these decisions. But AI enables people to work with all this decision making workflows much more easily as well. So it's a double whammy. Not only are we able to improve and optimize the basic structure of the decisions and the decision making process in a more general architectural level, we're also able to do it for each individual person working on the decision as well.
Exactly, exactly. So let's bring that to life a little bit in some of these examples. So I am shifting back to the presentation here. Hopefully it's visible. And so just to give, three very, simple examples of how decision intelligence in Cloverpop, has been deployed, right? So number one is within, a consumer health environment within specifically media investment allocation, right? So if we think about that question, it's a highly complex, highly political and cascading type of a decision, right? So first question is how much media budget should we deploy? Number two is how do we allocate it across which brands, across which geographies? And then on a continuous basis, across which channels? And that's constantly shifting. Do we invest more into social versus SEO, linear TV versus digital? And then within those channels, TikTok versus Instagram or what have you, right? And so in this case, the organization wanted to remove a lot of the politics out of the process, but we also needed to optimize them in a much faster way, right? And so what we had done in this case is essentially mapped out the cascading decision process. We've codified that, right? The organization had signed off on this is how we want to think about media investment allocation. What are the parameters? Connected across multiple different data sources, right? So foundationally, there are, media mix data or media mix reports and a lot of their lift coefficients, POS data, and a few other sources, right? And so on a week-by-week basis now, what the system is doing is providing recommendations to the media buyers on how should we shift the allocation, right? Drop your allocation within, social and shift $20,000 from, Instagram to TikTok, shift from linear TV to, print media. And that those hundreds of recommendations are being deployed to those various brand managers and media buyers on a week or a month basis as of today. Number two, what actions can we take to improve brand performance, right? So organizations spend hundreds of thousands of dollars doing, brand equity studies, buying POS data from, syndicated data partners, et cetera, et cetera. And what they get back from these organizations is long lists of, decks, 50, 60-page decks of every cut of the survey that came out. They're going into dashboards to review their, sales data week over week, quarter over quarter. But how are the marketers actually trying to understand, okay, how do I actually impact the brand performance? So very similar overall approach to the previous example is, okay, let's digitize how brand managers think about increasing share, increasing top line, et cetera, all the different tactics that they have in their disposal and how they connect, right? So creating that knowledge graph. From there, once we connect those various data sources, those brand managers, now we're getting specific recommendations, right? Adjust your media spend, and we have to drive that in order to, optimize for our market share growth. What this had been able to do for them is, number one, get to those recommendations 2 times faster. Number two is via traditional suppliers, right? So think about your, massive market research and analytics providers, right? They have a bunch of analysts sitting there grinding through all of that information, creating those decks and those presentations, and then, delivering on them. And there's another couple of weeks to actually go make those decisions. Well, because we've been able to automate it, we've been able to drive efficiency in terms of what is the actual data needed for which purposes. Because we're able to automate a lot of that analyst work, we're able to deliver these capabilities 30% cheaper than traditional suppliers that would be advising on those same types of decisions. And then finally, within a pharmaceutical context, right? So we're working with an oncology drug maker. And within, I'll make an example, within a specific drug formulary, imagine about 120 distinct raw materials that go into a specific batch for this oncology drug. If one of those raw materials do not show up to the manufacturing plant on time, that puts at risk the actual batch delivery to the market. Number one, from a financial impact, about $20 million per batch. More importantly is, patient health is now at risk because they're not getting oncology drugs that they need, right? So at any time now that this organization has some preemptive or proactive risk identification, they're able to go into Cloverpop and quickly assess what is the best option to replace that specific vendor for this specific batch, right? That's increased their overall time to decision by about 40%, and about 150,000 drug doses have been delivered sooner based on that use case that have been deployed. Okay. So just wanted to share a couple examples. Cloverpop and Decision Intelligence has been deployed in a lot of different supply chain areas, a lot of different commercial areas within HR and people services. So it's a very configurable and widely applicable type of both discipline as well as a technology. So with that, Erik, maybe we open the floor for some questions.
Absolutely. So I've had some questions come in the Q&A tab and some come in chat. If folks have more questions, please jump in. Either one, chat or Q&A works. And I'm gonna pick. I think we've addressed most of the Q&A ones. There's a couple I'll pull out. There's Brian just asked a question in chat. It's a big question, probably warrants an entire webinar by itself, but I'm going to try to answer it. So let me just state it out loud here. So what are the current limitations or guardrails on internal and external data inputs, and which AI agents are used to analyze, aggregate, and generate insights from that data? It's the big question. And I'm gonna try to answer it 2 ways as quickly as I can. So one way to answer your question is to hark back to a very important concept that Lanny said earlier, which is thinking decision back. So in a general sense, the architecture that we put in place is looking at the answer to all of your questions from the decision standpoint. And the decision then becomes the owner of any guardrails around data, what data is being brought in from internal or external sources. The decision itself is the owner of orchestrating agents that need to be used in order to complete the decision. So that's like a general sort of architectural principle, which is look at the decision itself and then look out from there to see what governance is needed, to see what, say, roles and permissions the people and the AI agents need to have in relation to that decision. So that's how we work. General architectural principle. In practice, uh, the agents that we're using are primarily agents that we've built, although we do interface with other external agents. Uh, for instance, we're building an extension for Copilot, and Copilot has an incredible amount of capabilities within Microsoft universe. That's just one example. Uh, the agents within Cloverpop fall into two classes. There's a class of agents that deal with taking enterprise data and translating that into descriptions of the data, decision-specific insights, and decision-specific recommendations based on that data. And we call that collectively DSIGHT. It's a set of agents to do that. The other agents are agents, some of which you saw in the demo, and we're not like calling them out and say, hey, here's an agent, but they're agents that do things like look at the overall structure and logic of the decision and suggest ways to improve the logic of the decision or to improve the inputs into the decision, that look at the overall inputs into the decision so far from people, from systems, from documents, from wherever, and generate insights to support that decision or recommendations about other choices that might be considered or what a best case scenario might be for this decision. So the agents there are working within the structure and logic of the decision, which is a very important part of our implementation. It's what are the decisions we're going to focus on? How should those decisions be structured? What are the inputs? What are the governances required? And in a final answer, in a very, very kind of marketing oriented, but actually true way of saying it, is that we see each decision as a multi-agent orchestration that is a no code environment. So any sort of business analyst level person can create a decision structure, and that then deploys the agents into that structure appropriately with the appropriate governance and so forth. In order to do more sophisticated integrations, it's more complicated than that. It's not just somebody going into our interface and setting up a template. But in practice, a lot of what we do is actually at that level. It's relatively quick to implement. Lanny, there's a question for you. Is just a quick summary of like what's a typical implementation cycle look like? If we're working with a client, what are the stages? You don't have to go into great detail since obviously that's a big question too. But
Yeah. So there's essentially three different levels of implementation based on the human-led AI augmented or AI assisted, AI augmented, and then AI automated path, right? So three different levels that dictates the timeline. So the first one is the shortest that could be deployed within a day or two. If anybody on this call, wanted to get a decision, mapped out and start using it, we could have it ready by the end of the day, right? So that's a very quick piece. In practice, though, essentially the couple key steps here, right? First, we need to map out the overall decisions. We've got a process to do that, both from a technology standpoint as well as a decision success team that is trained on these, as well as preset templates that typically for an enterprise application get a 60-70% of the way there, then they're configured, right? So we set by starting with the decision framework, then we set up the instance, and then onboard the team. There's ongoing decision success hours, and we help with that change management as well. When we start getting to the AI augmented or AI automated level, now all of a sudden we're integrating data sources. There's some modeling on the back end, et cetera, right? So now we're going from, a day to deploy to probably a month on the AI augmented side where we're answering specific questions with those agents, with those models. So we have to test to make sure that the output is very consistent. So there's more of a Q&A process there. And so that's probably 4 weeks to deploy, same overall steps, with the addition of some, data engineering work that has to happen. And the AI automated piece, bit of a bigger lift, probably 2 to 3 months. Essentially, what we're doing there is we're developing that business logic. We're connecting those data assets. So a little bit more of a data engineering effort, but we have to spend a significant time on QA there. We want to back test those decisions to make sure they were the right ones, so that we have a quality model coming out of it on the back end. So Deployment everywhere, anywhere from a day to about 2, 3 months. And of course, it depends on the number of decision areas we want to cover.
Great. So, Lanny, we're getting near the end, but I think there's maybe one last question. It's kind of a hard one, and I've had a chance to think about it. So, if you don't have an instant answer, I'll give it. But what is the most differentiated or important capability of what you're bringing to market?
The most differentiated is a bit of a different way of thinking, right? The decision back, as the overarching kind of philosophy here is, I think, fundamentally new to how we've addressed data analytic questions in the past, right? So, um, you know, 15 years working across data analytic areas, of course, there's a kind of, we're talking about the term insights quite a bit. How do we define these insights? How do we define these insights? Almost for the purpose of just creating these different elements, right? We ask executives, hey, we're going to create a dashboard for you. What charts do you want to see, right? Almost thinking like in Minority Report, Tom Cruise just has all his data, he's moving things around. We're beyond Minority Report, right? We're getting to actually exciting stuff by saying, okay, how do I get to outcomes? And to do that, you have to step back a little bit and start thinking, okay, what is the business objective I'm trying to achieve? What is the decision we need to make? And to be honest with you, that's a little bit of a different skill set that is required. It requires you to really step back and think about the business side first, and then get into technology, then get into data analytics. But given where AI is going, I think that is actually the exact right skill set that needs to exist within the teams deploying these types of technologies. And I think it's still missing. So there's going to be a lot of upskilling that needs to happen.
Right.
So what's
That,
your
that so that, that was a great. That was essentially my answer. I won't say it in my slightly different way, but it's good to know we're aligned on that. There's one last question, a little bit more tactical about something that's on people's minds, and then we can wrap it up. Which is, how do you ensure your agents have not adopted bias or their reasoning logic has gone south? So it's a great question. It's a multi-layered answer. And again, the decision back or decision centric thinking is a key part of that. So we don't have agents that are just, you know, taking a single prompt and working on their own and coming back with answers. The multi-agent orchestration that we're doing and any recommendation or insight has many layers of validation and many layers of structure that make it more difficult, not impossible. These are especially for any LLM interface is not a perfectly transactional interface. We all know that now. We're used to that, and that's okay. And we make sure that those occasional mistakes are manageable and very visible, trackable, governed, all that sort of stuff. But having a full set of decision logic, decision inputs, decision collaborators, including both human and AI, working together in a logged, tracked, analyzed, transparent manner means that the amount of bias and drift and hallucination is very low. Like in practice, much lower than any of our experiences in working with just a regular, say, ChatGPT type interface, because we're controlling all the prompts. Like if you're when you're using Cloverpop interacting with AI, it seems like you're asking one question, but that question gets submitted to the AI with massive context. It's a multi-step prompt. Each prompt is, a page or two, all of which has been validated to ensure that we get reliable responses. Your question is good. It's something that's going to, I think, probably for a very long time, be something we have to keep track of. The governance and the tracking and logging and review of that is an important part of our system. And I think any AI system has to do that. But those are not reasons not to deploy, because the LLMs are very powerful when they're used properly in this way.
one specific piece, right? Because there's a big gap, I think, still in the data analysis capabilities within a lot of LLMs. So when we're deploying
Mhm.
AI automated or AI augmented, so that's kind of our DSITE capability. Those derived variables are still calculated via the models, the analytics, hard coded, right? And then in that case, the
Mhm.
LLM is simply translating
Right.
math and the output into natural language, right? And the second piece to that is the actual frameworks and the trees, because they're broken out into those individual pieces. you could put a lot more guardrails than you would if you just use a black box like a Claude or something like that and just ask a question and provide some context.
Yep. Yeah, totally. So Lanny, thanks. This is great. I think it was an excellent presentation. Thanks everybody for your participation, your questions. We'll be sharing the recording and the deck with everyone. And obviously, we're here to meet live and talk through your specific cases. So appreciate it. Have a great day, everybody.
Thank you all. Take care.